This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. And I'm here with the other elder at In Church, Montana Dan. And today, Dan has persuaded two legislators from the legislature of Montana and one former legislator, and of course Dan's a former legislator, come to us today and tell us what's going on with Medicare in the Montana legislature. Now, all over the country, from what I just hear in passing, this is a problem. Medicare has become a problem, they think. Now, I'm going to find out if that's true or not, because I'm not privy and well-versed in the question of Medicare, but I bet you, and I think I'm going to find out, that has something to do with the change in what the Trump administration is doing and how the states are reacting, the state legislatures are reacting to what he's doing. Now, I'm going to find out. That's just a speculation. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and I'm going to let him spearhead the investigation and the interrogation of these legislators. Well, go ahead, Dan.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for coming on, all of you. I'll do ladies first. Representative Gillette, she's in the next county to the west of us. Do you want to just do a real quick summary of, you said you could introduce yourself well, so I'll
sure.
let you do it.
Absolutely.
Representative Gillette.
First Brent and Dan, thank you, and Dan, thank you for having us on. Really appreciate it. And I am a third-term legislator. I'm from sort of the southwest part of Montana. So some people have visited this area, whether you've gone to Big Sky to ski or maybe gone to Yellowstone National Park. That's sort of the general area that I'm in. My community is very agricultural based, so a lot of ag in my community. And I am the chair of what's called Section B, which is a component of our appropriations committee. And so we oversee, in Section B, we oversee the Department of Public Health and Human Services, which represents over half of our entire state budget, so about $7 billion. And that's a little bit about me. I'm a dentist originally and kind of wandered into politics like a lot of people do, and just always had a passion for promoting and supporting our freedoms and helping individuals do that. So that's a little bit about me. Thanks.
Thank you. And then we also have another current legislator, Representative Schillinger, and he's in the eastern part of the state. You want to give us a little quick summary, Representative?
You bet, Dan. Thanks a lot. Yeah, this is Jerry Schillinger. I represent House District 34, which is a very rural district here. I actually have 7 different counties in my district here, and I cover basically from east central all the way to North Dakota border, South Dakota border, Wyoming border, and the Missouri River on the north. And as far west is just about Garfield County. So, big district, agricultural district, ranching, farming. I'm a farmer here, a 4th-generation farmer. My great-grandparents have brought the whole crew on a railroad car to Homestead here back in 1910. So we've been here a long time and been through a lot. And as Jane is, I'm a 3rd-term representative. I sit on the Appropriations Committee. I chair the Section C of that committee, which is Transportation and Natural Resources. Is the general title. It has, I think, 6 different agencies, departments in that particular section. And like Jane, I've always had an interest and, I guess, a commitment to being an educated citizen, and in whether it be state government or federal government. And so finally, here, 3 terms or 3 elections ago, I decided if I was ever going to be involved and pursue that further, I just needed to get in. And Actually, President Trump was a big inspiration. He didn't have to do it, and I guess I don't have to do it, just like Jane doesn't have to do it either, but we feel a responsibility to our government, our citizens, and the future of our kids. So that's where we are. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Jerry's also the House Chair of what's known in Montana as the Freedom Caucus, so thank you for doing that. Rick Jor is a former representative going back in the 90s, I believe. You want to give us a short blurb, Rick?
Okay, and I'd like to also welcome Rick Jor. He's a former representative in Montana. He was in the 1995 to 99 session, and then he came back again in the 07 session. Rick has also been involved in the lumber industry, and currently sells native wild fish. So thank you for coming, Rick.
Thank you for your service. So just to start with, I guess I don't even know where to start with. I originally wanted to talk about, well, is it Medicare or Medicaid expansion? So we got to be careful of the terms, and Representative Gillette pointed that out to me this morning. It's Medicaid, and it's not ending Medicaid for everyone that was the problem, but that's what the media kind of put it at. So Representative Gillette, what is the purpose and of Medicaid and the proper role thereof?
Yeah, Dan, that's actually a really important question, and it is because a lot of these things sound similar. It's easy to get it convoluted in your mind, but there's a difference between Medicaid and Medicare. So Medicare is the federally administered, basically almost like a health insurance program for individuals who are older. And it's not need-based, so you could be Bill Gates or you could be anybody, and you qualify for Medicare. Medicaid is administered within each individual state, and that program is primarily targeted at lower income populations. And within Medicaid, there's two different types of Medicaid. So there's the Medicaid that we have traditionally associated Medicaid with, and that would be your little tiny great-grandma rancher from along the High Line in Montana. It would be her she's low income and she's elderly and she doesn't have a lot of resources, so the state provides her basically health coverage. It could be also children, very young children who are low income, and then it also provides services to individuals who are severely developmentally disabled. So people who, they'll work, which is a really fascinating topic, but not like you and I would work. So that's the traditional Medicaid. Medicaid expansion is what many states, not all, but many states across the U.S. has implemented. And Medicaid expansion is limited to, for the most part, childless, able-bodied adults. So meaning they don't have children, they could work, should they choose to work, they're able-bodied. And it's primarily younger individuals, like about 19 to 29 years old.
Okay, Representative Schillinger, it seems like we had a little tiff for taff going on in the legislative session this year, and I think the Freedom Caucus stood strong, and I thank you all for that. Could you give us a brief summary of kind of what happened and maybe what were the driving forces of some of the problems?
Well, thank you, Dan. That's a pretty broad area there, but I guess where I'll go with that is the issues that really created a lot of turmoil in the whole session. Started back, basically before primary elections in 24. And we had a situation where the Governor Gianforte decided to get involved in legislative primaries and endorse candidates, and primarily endorse candidates that were competing against conservative candidates. And so he was supporting what I call the big government Republicans. And in some cases that helped contribute to the conservatives' defeat. In the case of Representative Gillette, she was such a strong candidate and worked so hard in her district that even though the governor and a lot of the Rhino-type PACs were against her, she came through in flying colors, which we're thankful for that. It's a testament to what a good legislator she is. But in other districts that had different dynamics, we lost some excellent representatives. Rhonda Knutson, who was running for the Senate, we ended up with just a total loss there in Greg Hunter, and he won that primary, and a number across the state. And so what happened then, to go a little further, I guess, in November, of course, as you know, we get together in Helena and have our orientation and elect leadership, and that in the Senate they had actually 32 Republicans, so a strong majority, we thought, and only 19. 30 must be 33. No, 32 and 18. That's what it was. 18 Democrats. Well, in the first 15 minutes of the session, Minority Leader Flowers stood up and moved to change the rules, and what later became referred to as the Nasty Nine, Republicans joined in with all 18 Democrats to form what became an all too familiar 27-23 majority in the Senate and put the Senate in control essentially of the Democrats. And so what had been done informally, maybe you could say, during the primaries in the House, put the big government Republicans in a strong position versus the conservatives, happened with rules changes. They started on first day and went on for the whole session. And actually they were changing rules, blasting bills. So it rendered so many of the committees almost useless. They were changing committee makeup on the fly during the session. It was a real mess. So that's a little bit of an overview there, Dan, and we can go from there.
Dan, this is Brent.
Go ahead.
May I ask a question? Well, Representative Gillette, you talked about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, et cetera. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm not the dumbest either. And I frankly don't pay much attention to Medicaid. I've heard it all my life. Well, ever since Uncle Lyndon Johnson and all those fellows put that kind of stuff in place, I've heard about it. Is Medicaid, and you did a good job explaining the difference a little, but is Medicaid federal money? Does it come to the state from the feds?
100%. Absolutely. It does come from, a lot of the funding comes from the federal government, which I just honestly see is it's all taxpayer money. It doesn't really matter in my mind whether it comes from the state or the feds. It's all taxpayer funds. That's what it boils down to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but for the traditional Medicaid population, so that's the little great-grandma, the children, the developmentally disabled, that one, there is what's called a federal match. And the federal government will put in about 60%. Now we're putting in about 40%. And every state is different with respect to that. But for Medicaid expansion, and I think this is the allure that makes it so difficult for states, including Montana, is that the federal government will put in 90% and the state only has to pay 10%. And so in their minds, it's not a huge burden to the state. which, I mean, I guess on one level I can understand and agree with. But again, I see all of it, whether it's federal money or state money, it's all taxpayer money, right? Our government has no money that they own. It's all because of us, the taxpayers. So it doesn't really matter in my mind whether the money comes proportionally from the federal government or the state.
Do the feds use that money to control state legislators? Say, we won't give you that money unless you do what we say over here. Is that what happens with money?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yep, no doubt.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you, Dan, for letting me interject and try to learn. I'm like a student in class. I raise my hand, and you let me ask a question, and questions are stupid questions. I've learned that. I try not to ask stupid questions, but that helps. Go ahead, Dan.
All right. Brent has the control board, so he can ask questions anytime he wants. But a question for Rick Jor. Rick was a former legislator. I don't know quite how to ask this, Rick, without getting a huge, long answer, but should the federal government be involved in this type of stuff, or what should be the role of the federal government, Rick?
I can give you a really short answer on that. No. N-O. There's no constitutional sanction, Dan, and if I could just touch on that quickly, I actually brought that up when I communicated with my local legislators. Anyway, these kind of bills, and I appreciate Jane touching on that, trying to explain to people why you would vote no on these things, because in the minds of pragmatists and those that have developed a more, what I would say at the minimum is a collectivist, if not a statist attitude, where government has authority to do whatever it wants as long as they get the votes. I disagree with that, of course. The rule of law should override that. And so my argument is the enumerated powers of Article 1, if we're going to be originalists at all, we need to analyze the Constitution according to original intent. The enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8 are very clear, and the 10th Amendment is just as clear. The powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. So it's simply a usurpation in my view, and I understand this is a hard thing to explain to people that are used, both legislators and voters who are used to federal government usurpations, but it simply has no constitutional sanction. Medicare, it's a trap in the sense that, like Forsman said, if I could quote Theodore Forsman, the gentle government that promises to hold your hand as you cross the street refuses to let go when you get to the other side. And when Jane...
That's funny.
When Jane pointed out very correctly that this Medicaid expansion specifically is 90% federal and 10% state, this is exactly how the federal government drives state budgets. You can go back to the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, it's 80-20. Well, the average legislator that isn't grounded in their oath of office and their constitutional principle says we can spend 20 cents and get 80 cents from the feds. Well, pragmatism leads them to fall for that, but the consequence is immeasurable in my view. And again, Jane pointed out that this is taxpayer dollars. Here's the fact. The federal government didn't have the money when they instituted Medicaid expansion. This was all deficit spending, and so the taxpayers that Jane are talking about, many of them aren't even born yet, that are going to be paying the cost. This $36 trillion debt isn't from spending just on constitutionally authorized functions of the federal government. It's spending on usurpation. So I'll stop there, Dan. I appreciate the chance to convey that thought.
Well, thank you. A question for Representative Schillinger. I heard you mention President Trump, and we've all heard this terrifying news of the Doge. And what could likely happen to some of this excess money that the states have been getting from the federal government? I realize I'm jumping a long ways away, but can you give a stab at that, Representative Schillinger?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I guess from my perspective, the most terrifying thing about Doge is that if the things that they pointed out as waste, fraud, and abuse, if they're not adopted, those cuts are not adopted, I think that's what's terrifying. And if those of us that have been paying attention to the big, beautiful bill happening back in D.C. right now, I guess we're sitting with a lot of, I would say anxiety in that we'll extend tax cuts back there, but there's not much appetite for doing the actual cutting of spending. And one of the things, I guess I'm going to get off track here a little bit here maybe too, but when the question of control was brought up here a little bit ago, does the federal government use these funds to control states? About four things at least popped into my mind that they use, that they control us with the loss of those federal funds. And one is we can't restrict abortion with those funds. We can't restrict people using those funds for transing kids or adults. Can't require work from people receiving Medicaid. That the only way you can get any of those things done is through waivers from the federal government. And so far, the Biden administration certainly didn't allow them, and that's one of the big debates going on right now with the big, beautiful bill is that there's resistance from some of the Republicans to enforce any work requirements even, which is absolutely pathetic. When we go back just a little bit further, the COVID stab, the so-called vaccination, that was held over our heads if we didn't force employees and providers, medical providers, to get the stab, that we would lose those Medicaid and Medicare funds. So a number of ways they use that to control. And then just one more thing on the Medicaid expansion that Representative Gillette pointed out, 90% federal, 10% state, but actually it's a bigger fraud than that even, in that the bed tax that's put on every hospital bed stay here in the state then is sent to the federal government and returned with I forget how many times match. So that essentially wipes out most of that 10% state match as well. So it's the thing that just troubles me to no end is the lack of desire on the Republicans, many of the Republicans. There's a few, the Freedom Caucus especially, people that are holding out for some serious cuts on the federal budget, but so much of the swamp is just not interested. A good example is the Inflation Reduction Act, too, that provided all this green new scam money. And we've got our senators in North Dakota that are dug in opposing cuts to that because they're sold out to the energy companies there in NextEra and those that are throwing up windmills all over the place. So we've got a lot of challenges in front of us.
There is a lot of stuff, and we're not even probably going to scratch the scratch on the surface. But Representative Gillette, we were talking earlier. What is possibly going to happen with? Let's first off. One of the jobs of the state legislature is to pass a balanced budget. How does the Medicare, the expansion stuff, and other things, how does it affect that? We were talking earlier. If you could dive in that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, first I'd like to say that, wow, Rick and Jerry are spot on. I completely agree with everything they said. Well said. As far as Medicaid expansion goes, with the bigger picture of our budget, that it represents $2 billion a year, or not a year, I'm sorry, over the biennium. The really crazy thing is that, at least in Montana, not for the nation, but in Montana, is that the governor presented a budget in which he buried that policy within the budget such that we couldn't ever debate it. So we literally passed a $2 billion over the biennium policy that we never debated. We never had an open conversation about, which is really nuts in my mind. That seems like a lot of money. I don't know, maybe it doesn't seem like a lot of money to other people, but to me, $2 billion feels like a lot. And that's always into the future.
Representative Gillette, for those of us that haven't been legislators, I don't understand the process. And you said that the governor buried the provision in the legislation in such a way that you couldn't debate it. Can you unpack that a little more? Because I don't understand.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes,
that's all right.
I understand.
That's why we're doing this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how it works in other states. I guess I just know from Montana. But how it works here, and Representative Schillinger can feel free to chime in, but how it works here is that the governor, before we even show up in January, before the legislators show up in January, the executive branch, so the governor and all the agencies and departments underneath the governor, put together their budget for the next biennium or the next 2 years. And so Montana was actually pretty unique compared to other states. With respect to Medicaid expansion, we had a provision that said in this year, in this 2025, we were going to be able to have the opportunity to consider the merits or not merits thereof of Medicaid expansion, and actually sunset Medicaid expansion if we found that it was not in the best interest of Montanans to have that go on. So we had the opportunity to sunset Medicaid expansion, which is pretty unique. I think there's only one other state that had that opportunity. But what happened is the governor, within the budget of Department of Public Health and Human Services, mechanically put Medicaid expansion in. There's not a really good way to explain this, but there's mechanically put Medicaid expansion into the budget such that it couldn't be debated as a standalone bill, so that we didn't receive information about how much it was going to cost, both over the next biennium and then into the future. So because of how he presented his budget, we were not able to adequately debate the merits or not merits of Medicaid expansion. And Jerry, you can feel free to chime in. I'm not sure that I'm explaining it that well.
No, I think you're doing pretty well there, Jane. And really, essentially, all it came down to, the only thing that we were able to discuss specifically about the expansion was whether or not just to extend the sunset another 5 years or 3 years, or the bill that we were presented eliminated the sunset. So between the big government Republicans and the entire Democrat caucus, they supported that. And so the sunset on Medicaid expansion has been eliminated. And as Representative Gillette pointed out here, is that basically it's been buried now within House Bill 2, which is the big budget bill.
So am I right in saying that the governor understands the rules of the legislature and he tries to use them to his advantage that way?
Well, I don't think he tries. I think he does it. He knows.
Yeah.
I get your point. Okay.
He 100% does it.
You sufficiently buffed me up on that, and I understand. I appreciate it. Dan, continue with what you've got planned. I'm learning a lot.
I might just interject if I could here, and I would ask Representative Gillette this question. Jane, you had another example in Section B of kind of budget chicanery there that came in the governor's budget where they attempted to move the SNAP program out of House Bill 2 so that it appeared that House Bill 2 wasn't growing like it really is.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much gamesmanship and manipulation of the narrative, and that's what Representative Schillinger is talking about. So he's talking about SNAP, which is probably more commonly known as food stamps. So the governor presented a budget, which basically that's a $350 million hit to the state, every biennium, and the governor basically took it out of there. So his budget that even though we were still paying for it, he put it into a different part that wasn't in our general appropriations bill. And so what it appeared to be is that he was presenting a budget that was $350 less, that he was being conservative because he had somehow magically cut costs, but it's a shell game. That's not what happened. He just moved it over to basically a different appropriations method that made it look less. And that's just one example of many. Even when House Bill 2, which again is our general appropriations bill, came back from the Senate with the big government Republicans and all the Democrats had passed an amendment to our general appropriations bill, House Bill 2, that cut about close to $50 million from our Montana State Hospital, which is where individuals go who have severe mental health issues. That's where they go to be hospitalized. And so he took that money from there, but that's a shell game too, because even though we won't pay for it in this biennium, next time when we come in 2027, we're going to have to pay for it then. So he just postponed. He basically put it on the state's credit card, both the governor, the Democrats, and then the big government Republicans basically just made a move to put it on. They didn't actually spend less. It's just they delayed when they had to spend it. So there was all kinds of gamesmanship like that.
Rick, do you have any comments on what was been going on this session? I think you were in a slim minority and maybe a majority both when you were in session. Any comments on what's been talked about here?
Well, I would say regarding minorities and majorities as far as parties, I think a better way to look at it, at least in my experience, and I think Jane and Jerry were both hitting on this when they would point out that the big government Republicans would vote with the Democrats. Even though we had, in my first term, I think we had 67 Republicans and 33 Democrats in the House, I've never considered those majorities as conservative at all, or even Republican. I think a better way to look at it is if you've got a majority of statists and a minority of freedom-loving and freedom-understanding and constitutional understanding conservatives, if you will. And that's the way it's played out. There's the trend towards more government and more paternalism and the whole welfare state, nanny state mentality, in my view, just continues regardless of which party's in the majority. It's what is interesting, and I guess I would ask this maybe as a question to Jane and Jerry since they were there. Did you notice that the Montana Chamber of Commerce supported Medicaid expansion and actually did radio ads in support of it. And what would, the typical conservative would think that the Montana Chamber of Commerce would support Republican principles of less spending, less government. Do you have any thoughts on why the Montana Chamber of Commerce, for example, would support that? And maybe you were there when they came in and testified.
I was going to let you go first, but I bet we're going to say pretty close to the same thing, but you'll probably say it better. It's welfare for businesses. Medicaid expansion is welfare for businesses, so that businesses can pay very low wages, and when they pay those very low wages, they will get employees, right? Because they also can provide insurance at that point, right? Really good insurance. It's crazy, but Medicaid expansion is much, much, much better coverage. It pays for services that a private health insurance plan would never pay for. So it's a way to provide health insurance for your low-wage employees without actually having to pay for it. So that's why I think it's there. That's my thought on it, but maybe Representative Schillinger has a different thought.
Well, I think actually, Jane, you're spot on. I would just take it a little further in that it's corporate welfare to the big 7 hospitals that are corporate hospitals now. They're not your local community nonprofits anymore. They're corporate, and a lot of the decisions they made during COVID, for instance, that drove off employees, whether it be nurses, doctors, staff, they just get bailed out here with things like Medicaid, and they are experts in knowing how to maximize the billing that they charge government, whether it be for Medicare or Medicaid services. So in my mind, it's, yes, Medicaid and Medicare, while it's sold as we heard during the session, the salvation of small hospitals in rural Montana. I don't believe that. I've sat on the board of our local medical center here for over 30 years, and if anything, Medicaid expansion, for instance, cost our facility money. It didn't add revenues, because people that had previously paid their bills in entirety that went on Medicaid expansion, now we get reimbursed at 50% instead of 100% when they paid their bills. So it's a big business bailout, whether it be for the hospitals or, as Jane pointed out, and I think it was pointed out several times on the floor during debate, that these businesses want their employees covered under Medicaid. And why? Well, then they don't have to pay them enough to pay for their own insurance. Same with daycare, same with employee housing, workforce housing, whatever it is, subsidized. The subsidies flow through to who? Actually, they flow through to the people that can hire their people for cheap then. So that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, go ahead, Brent.
This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com.